Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD1111 class for the fall 2020 semester at Rankin, I've been doing a series of video presentations based on the textbook for the class, which is Get Programming with Node.js by Jonathan Wexler, a Manning publication. I'm in Unit 1, Lesson 6, and we're between a third and a half of the way through there. And I'm on the top of page 64 in the book, where the author says right there, you can see the name of the figure is Server Routing Logic to Render Views. So the user makes an HTTP request, the web server receives the request, and performs logical steps to return the response. The routes we build in determine what the user will see. So as it says, if the user requests the home page, we respond with that page, contact page, image, an image, etc. These all together are known basically as assets. Alright? The server may communicate with the application server to perform more data operations before submitting a response. Then finally, the response is returned to the client in the form of HTML text, JSON, or something else. So what happens if you try to read a file that does not exist on your computer? Well, I guess it depends on what you've done. I mean, it's going to check to see if in the callback there is a check for error, which you should always do, and if there is, it'll handle it based on what you put in there, and if not, the program will probably crash, I would guess. Okay. Says you can even log it, just log it if that's what you want to do. So, 6.2, starting on the bottom half of page 64, serving assets. Your application's assets are the images, style sheets, and JavaScript. Again, this is client-side JavaScript, not server-side. So, your application's assets are the images, style sheets, and JavaScript that work alongside your views on the client side. Like your HTML files, these file types such as .jpeg, .css, etc. need their own routes to be served by your application. And I don't know if this is a great analogy or not, but just kind of look at it this way. Imagine that you're using a GPS. If you put in an exact address, that's where you're going to go. All right? But let's say you can't find the exact address. All right. Then, I mean, the GPS doesn't know where to go. In what I'm getting to here is if it's a JPEG file, the system needs to know it's a JPEG file. If it's a CSS file, the system needs to know it's a CSS file. So, to start this process, create a public folder on your project's root directory and move all your assets there. Within the public folder, create a folder for images, CSS, and JS, and move each asset into its respective folder. By this point, your file, it should look like this. So what we want to do one more time, we want to create a public folder, and then an images folder, a CSS folder, and a JS folder. All right? So, in the project's root directory, create a public folder. Under the public folder, we want to create, look, it sounded like at least 3 subfolders, and those are images, CSS, and JS. To hold our images, our cascading style sheet files, and our JavaScript files on the client side. All right? So I created that. public folder, and I moved all the assets there. Within the public folder, I created a folder for for images, CSS, etc. Okay. It's not showing on here that I can see. It's kind of interesting. The picture doesn't look like the same picture that is actually in the book. In the book, underneath this, they have another thing that comes down here that is off, just like, that is off of here. So imagine that coming down. It says public right here, and then in there they have images, a JS, and a CSS folder. So now your application is organized. Refine your routes to better match the goal listing in 6.4. The code may appear to be overwhelming, but all you're doing is moving the file reading logic into its own function and adding if statements to handle specific file type requests. Upon receiving a request, save the request's URL in a variable URL. With each condition, check URL to see whether it contains the file's extension or MIME type. Customize the response's content type to reflect the file being served. Call your own custom read function at the bottom of main to reduce repeated code. The last function uses fs.readFile to look for a file by the name requested, writes a response with that file's data, and logs any messages to your console. Now this will be a longer file. We'll get there in a minute. On the bottom of page 65 and going up to the top of page 66, notice that in the first route you're checking whether the URL contains .html. If it does, it tries to read a file with the same name as the URL. You further abstract your routes by moving the code to read the file into its own read file function. You need to check for specific file types, set the response headers, and pass the file path and response object to this method. With only a handful of dynamic routes, you're now prepared to respond to multiple file types. Alright, so this is what we have now. So when you start to look in here, notice, okay, if the index of star.html does not equal -1, and I think they're saying if we don't have an HTML extension, okay. Otherwise, JavaScript, CSS, we've got ping here. I suppose we could probably read this as like JPEG, JPEG, WebP, etc. So we could probably make separate else ifs for in here also. Now your application can properly handle requests for files that don't exist. You can visit that with test.js.html or just test to see the error message. To render the index page, append the file type to the URL. Okay, so the next section, as it says in here, will further show you how to redefine the file sequence. Okay, so we're going to have another one of our famous or infamous checks here that says what should be your default response if a file is not found. What should be, well, let's see what they say. Oh, that would make sense. You'd send back a 404, which means the file not found. That's the file not found HTTP status code. All right. Now, there is a lot of code here. We are already at 10 minutes. But you know what? That's not that much time. So guess what? It's what? 54 lines? Web server with specific routes. I believe this is what we're going to want to put into our main. So you're going to get to see me type. For some reason I keep clicking zoom as opposed to clicking this. Alright, so I'm going to comment these out again. In fact, I'm not even sure in here what I'm going to need. Let's come in and do this. First, let me close zoom. Alright. I think I'll still need this, but this get view URL and a lot of this other stuff is probably going to change quite a bit. So I think if I highlight all of this and I do, is it Control Tab? There we go. Control Tab /, it commented out everything for me. Let's start. I may or may not need the stuff that's showing right there, but we're going to find out. Your response. Okay. Alright, now it looks as though this is going to be very similar right here, the next thing that we write. But it's going to be JS. So I'm going to try to grab the code that's here. I need to put an else on there, not an SL, an else. If JS is -1, so that should be text/JS. Alright, so let's double check and make sure that that is actually correct. So I'll have to go down here. URL index of JS res right head status OK content type text. It's not JS, it's text. JavaScript and custom read is text. So that's public. Yeah, of course this would change. Dash public /JS $ of the res. Okay. Then we'll need another else for CSS and then one more for paint. So let's check and make sure that what I've written here is indeed correct. So I checked that one and I checked this one. So it's up to here now. Custom read file, images. Oh, we're getting there. Else we want to send back this error response. I'm just going to grab that. Okay. Well, there's a lot of stuff to copy here, so I'm just going to grab the rest. I'm sorry. address. Now, could I have made a mistake? Of course, it's me, so you know that there's probably a pretty good chance I made a mistake, but let's just go on anyway. Now your application can properly handle requests for files that don't exist. You can visit localhost 3000 test.js or even just test to see the error message. Let's see. File not found. That's good. So even if we just put test in there, according to that, we should get the same error. We do. So that's good. Now where are we? The next section shows you how to further redefine your routing structure and give routes their own module. Alright, what should be the default response if a route isn't found? Well, isn't that a 404? Which is file not found. Alright, that should be it for this part, and I'm going to move on then to 6.3, moving your routes to another file, and we'll handle that in just a couple minutes.